All right, I am here with Federico Viticci, the writer of not one, but two major reviews in a single week. Federico
Yes.
has written both an iOS and iPadOS 15 review, as well as an iPad mini review. And last week, we did an episode all about the iOS and iPadOS review. This week, we are going to talk about the iPad mini review. And I should, of course, up front say thank you to our two sponsors for this episode, OneBlocker and MacStadium. Federico, how you doing today?
I'm feeling fantastic. Thank you, John. It's very nice to be done with these stories.
I bet. I can only imagine what that's like. I will get there someday myself. It's a big relief because I know, especially, and I give you a lot of credit for going from one incredibly long, detailed review that you worked on for months straight into a hardware review, because hardware reviews aren't super easy in and of themselves for a lot of reasons. And to pick that up right after finishing and publishing the iOS and iPadOS review, which included not just the review itself, but all the stuff that goes on around that with the club and other things, is a lot. And so I'm sure you're feeling a little relieved to be done with those two large projects and have maybe an opportunity to dive into something a little more, something you can do in a day.
Yeah, it's, be a blogger again and
Right.
have posts that I can put together in a day or in a couple of hours. Or, I see something and I link it on MacStories like I used to do before. And that it feels very nice to be done with these things. And it was especially challenging for me to receive an iPad mini and have a deadline, have an embargo date while the review, the iOS and iPadOS 15 review wasn't out yet. And, it's this odd combination of having this responsibility, having this. And when I say responsibility, I feel like I can share this number. When I say responsibility, I mean, when in a span of a week, 500,000 people check out your review, that's
Right.
that's a responsibility that you
It's a
feel,
huge responsibility.
right?
Yes.
You have this wild amount of traffic and attention on you, and so I was having that pressure, and then Apple's like, hey, do you want an iPad mini? I sure do. I want to try the new iPad mini.
Of course you do,
I
but I don't have any time.
I don't have time, but I'll make the time. I'll make it happen. And so a few sleepless nights
Right.
and a lot of writing, but I was able to put this together in a couple of days. Of course, the iPad mini I've been testing for a week, so I received it on the Thursday, and the embargo was on the following Wednesday. So everything worked out, and I had a lot of fun with the mini, and I'm now just at the point where I can go back to my regular work. We talked about this on the Plus show for MacStories Plus members. If you're not signed up, go check it out at MacStories.plus. But I'm catching up on things. I'm cleaning up my task manager, and I'm playing with apps again, and I'm using the iPad mini a lot as a regular person, not as a review person, So it's
Right,
nice. It feels
right.
very nice.
No, that is great, and I think it was very smart of you to do a lot of your editing of your iOS review on the iPad Mini, so that you had an opportunity to just kind of use it a lot, even though you were busy doing other things, because that gave you an opportunity to really start getting used to it before you had to actually start writing, which is good.
There's something I want to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Before we talk about the iPad Mini. So I was browsing Reddit a couple of nights ago, and I saw a comment, not about me, but about another person that did an iPad mini review. And without having to, without naming names or pointing out this comment specifically, it basically said, I preferred this person when they were doing iPad reviews and this kind of coverage when they were not independent, when they had a main day job, because now it feels like they're doing reviews from the perspective of a reviewer, and they are talking about productivity, like they're covering productivity about being more productive. And the person on Reddit said, and I wish we would get more reviews from real people, real users, like, I don't know, artists or pilots or doctors. And that's something that I think there's something to that comment, because it's the kind of thing that I've seen time and time again pop up on Reddit and Twitter. There's a couple of interesting things about this line of thinking that some people have, which is there's a built-in maybe distaste for someone who starts doing this job for a living. I feel like it's only natural that some people online in your audience will see you as the person who made it, and therefore
Right.
you're now a paid shill and you shouldn't be
Right.
trusted anymore. But
yeah, I've definitely seen this myself.
exactly. But the second point, I wish we would get real reviews from pilots, doctors, farmers, all kinds of people who have a quote unquote real profession that isn't about being a blogger or a YouTuber, and they could give us their quote unquote real opinion about these devices. Now,
Right.
that's a valid point. It's fascinating to see how those kinds of folks use computers. It's something that years ago on MacStories Weekly, we tried to highlight ourselves with the iPads Around the World section, which is an old section from MacStories Weekly. So I totally get it.
Yep.
It is fascinating and it is useful to know. But let me tell you this. There's a reason why professional reviewers do professional reviews. Believe me, you wouldn't want to read or you wouldn't want to watch a review that's done by someone who doesn't do this for a living. It wouldn't be enjoyable. And I tell you this as the person who many, many times had to edit stories written by folks who are not writers for a living. And when I tell you...
very difficult, right? Very difficult.
In theory, you think you would enjoy that. But let me tell you, you really wouldn't. It wouldn't be an enjoyable review because as fascinating as that use case could be, it wouldn't be the kind of enjoyable, thorough, in-depth review that you would expect from someone who does this every month for a living again and again and again. So just like, you could make the same argument about a pilot. Oh, I wish that this plane could, I wish that someone else could take a look at the controls in this cockpit and give me his real opinion about flying a plane. And I mean, would you really like that? Would you like that, to have someone who's not from that field give you his real opinion? Sure, I could give you an opinion about, what's it called? I don't know, buttons and levers that you can pull in a plane.
Right.
But I feel like I see this kind of comment pop up every once in a while. And I just want to point out how, sort of in defense of reviewers, call it whatever you want to call it, but I think there's a reason why, and I don't like, this is not meant to be like a defense of me personally, but in general, we, writers, YouTubers, podcasters, we are fortunate to be able to do this kind of stuff for a living. We've been working hard to get to this point, and I think the audience, the reader, the listener, the watcher, the viewer, I guess, you wouldn't like a review done by someone who has a very limited use case that could be fascinating for a few minutes to read about it, but then you will be left thinking, okay, but where's the review? What do you know about USB transfer speeds? Well, I guess not. Do you know about like how thick it is? Do you know what kind of accessories it supports? Well, I guess not. So I just wanted to point this out because it made me think. That comment on Reddit made me think about this stuff.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think I kind of feel the same way. I do feel though that I think as reviewers, we have to always be careful to try to put ourselves in the shoes of as many people as possible, right? And as broad an audience as possible, because it is very easy if your profession is a certain thing. And from our perspective, it's like writing or podcasting or whatever it happens to be, to get too deep in the weeds on those things. And, average people who are reading our stuff are not producing podcasts and they're not writing on the internet. On the other hand, I think the jobs that we have, despite being, first of all, it's a real job. I'm here to tell you it's hard work and it's a real job. But also, I think that there's an awful lot of what we do that has relevance to people who are doing all sorts of different things, because I haven't always done this for a living. I used to be a lawyer, and the same things that I'm doing with task management now, working with you and writing about this stuff, is directly relevant to people in that profession and a whole bunch of other ones. So yeah, I think it's important to try to keep that perspective, but I agree with you on that. It's like, you probably wouldn't want to see the farmer review of the iPad mini, probably. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by OneBlocker. OneBlocker has been the premier content blocker for Safari for years, blocking lots more than just ads. The app includes an option to block annoying social badges, comments, pop-ups, and a long list of other things. OneBlocker can also block known trackers in the background on your device so nothing is sent from your device through any tracker servers. That's a really big deal. But that's not all. The latest version of OneBlocker includes a Safari extension that blocks YouTube ads, a great quality of life improvement for watching video. The process of setting up OneBlocker is incredibly simple, with OneBlocker walking you through every step with clear, concise instructions. OneBlocker is a universal purchase on the App Store, which means a subscription to the app works across all of your devices, iPhone, iPad, and Mac. OneBlocker is free to download and try with premium features costing $2.99 per month or $14.99 per year, with a lifetime pricing option available too. The subscription also supports family sharing, so a subscription can be used by 5 family members. However, for a limited time, listeners of App Stories can go to oneblocker.com/appstories. That's the number 1, blocker.com/appstories, and you'll receive a free month of OneBlocker Premium. So don't delay. Go visit oneblocker.com/appstories right away to get 1 month free and start protecting everything you do on your iPhone, iPad, and Mac for you and your family. OneBlocker. Remove ads, trackers, and browse faster. Our thanks to OneBlocker for their support of the show. I want to kick it off, Federico, because 18 months ago or so, I wrote about the iPad mini, and I kind of convinced you, I think, to dive back into the mini about 18 months ago and get one of the last generation iPad minis. And that came with a lot of compromises. I mean, I loved that mini because of the size, but it had a home button, it had thick bezels, it had a lightning connector. There's a lot of things about it that were very old and out of date, and it just looked antiquated by the time I got one, and especially by the time you got one. But it was still a really great device to have. But I think with what we've got now, I've told this story before, how I basically ended up passing that to my wife because she broke her old iPad mini somehow, mysteriously. And because I didn't want to go without a smaller iPad for a while, I ended up getting the iPad Air. And I really love the iPad Air. I use it actually quite a bit. And it's this weird in between though for me. It was still too big compared to the mini to be the iPad that I wanted to read on, like if I was lying in bed or lounging on the sofa or whatever it happened to be. But it was a little too small to be something that I wrote on all the time. So I didn't want to use it for that either. And I still have it and I still enjoy it. I still use it quite a bit, but I really miss the mini. And I think a great place to start, and maybe you can talk about this a little more in detail, is thinking about this as an iPad Air that's been shrunk down, because I know that's been said by a lot of people, but having used the Air myself now since last fall, it really is pretty much the spitting image of the iPad Air just shrunk down to a smaller size, right?
Yes, it's exactly that's a good way to put it. The iPad mini, the best way to think about it is, I think it's an iPad Air that's been shrunk down to a smaller size and has a taller display than before compared to the old iPad mini. You have the same industrial design and this is something that I pointed out in my review. We should appreciate how the 2018 iPad Pro inspired a whole lineup of iPads, where at this point you have multiple versions of the iPad Pro. You have the iPad Air, the iPad mini with the same design with the flat edges and that liquid retina display and Touch ID or Face ID in the iPad Pro. And the odd one left at this point is the base model iPad, the $329 iPad that's still using the old design with the physical home button and Touch ID and the thick bezels around the screen. But the iPad mini is a smaller version of the iPad Air. Same Touch ID button, which, by the way, I really hope we get that button back on the iPhone too. If Apple cannot make the under-screen Touch ID happen, then I wish they would just at least bring the Touch ID button so that you could.
It's a good button.
It's a good.
Right? It's really good because I've been using it on the Air for months now, and it's very fast and it works every single time.
It's a good button, and I wish that we would have it on the iPhone as well. So it's got the same design, same the Liquid Retina display. It's not XDR, it's not OLED. It's a regular LCD, IPS panel that's mostly comparable to the old one, but obviously it's a Liquid Retina one, so you got the curved edges and a different aspect ratio. I guess the only difference, besides the size, right? The difference from the iPad Air, there's a couple of them. First of all, you got that ultra-wide front-facing camera that enables center stage, which the iPad Air does not have because center stage was introduced with the iPad Pro in 2021. And because of the smaller size, so you can attach the second generation pencil to the iPad mini. This is one of the big features of the mini for people who are going to be using this as a very portable sketchbook. You can attach the second generation pencil to the side, and it's the usual magnetic attachment that you've seen on the iPad Pro and then on the iPad Air. The problem though, and we showed this off in a live stream that we did last week for Club MacStories Plus members. When you attach the pencil to the iPad mini, you can also see this in my photos in the review. The pencil is basically the same height of the mini. And that meant that there just wasn't enough room left for the volume buttons on the side of the mini. So what Apple had to do was they relocated the volume up and down buttons to the same side where there's the Touch ID button. So on the opposite end of the shorter side of the iPad mini, you got your two volume buttons on the left. This is when you're holding it in portrait, and the Touch ID button on the right, just like on the iPad Air, which initially, it can be a little strange to get used to that because for 3 years now, we've been taking screenshots on the iPad Pro and then the iPad Air by sort of pinching the edge of the iPad with Touch ID on one side and the volume up button on the other side. Now you need to press two buttons opposite to each other on the same side of the iPad, which takes a while to get used to, but it's fine.
You have to pin it against yourself, I guess, right? And press the buttons as you hold it against your chest or something like that.
It can be a little disorienting at first, but I think it's fine.
Let me jump in and ask you something, Federico, because one of the things that I liked about your review is that it was less about the specs and more about the experience.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe I'm jumping a little too far ahead here, but I feel like this is one of the most important aspects of this mini because it's very easy to look at it and say, well, why do I want an iPad that small? Or, well, it doesn't have ProMotion, or it doesn't have this other thing. And I feel like it's more about the entire package combined with the size and the weight and the way the weight is distributed that makes it particularly good at certain things that maybe an iPad Pro is too big for, or, even comparing it to something like a Kindle that makes it even better than a Kindle for certain things.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point because I think a lot of people will consider the iPad mini as an e-reader device. And you may say, well, that's an expensive e-reader you got going on there. And sure, but the thing is, it can be an excellent device for reading books, reading articles, catching up on RSS. But when you're done with those tasks, it can also become something else. It can be a game console. It can be a device where you watch YouTube. It can be a very portable podcast player. It can be the thing that you just hold in your hands and you waste time on Twitter with, for example. So the thing is, it's excellent for reading. It's excellent for playing video games also, I believe. This is my favorite iPad for playing games with touch controls. The iPad Pro is perfect for game controllers because you can pop it up on a Magic Keyboard or prop it up on a desk, and then you use a DualSense or an Xbox controller, for example, and it's excellent for that. But when it comes to touch controls, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, it's a little large and it's a little uncomfortable to use. But the iPad Mini, you just hold it in your hands and you got those virtual controls in landscape. They are conveniently placed under your thumbs, and it's a very nice experience. So I feel like that's the key thing to understand about this product, which is, yes, a lot of people will consider it for reading Kindle, reading books, reading List or Good Links, Pocket, whichever read later app you want to use. But at the same time, it's also an iPad. and it runs iPad OS, and it lets you do split view, lets you do slide over, it lets you use your own shortcuts. Something that always annoyed me when I was using the Kindle and then the Kobo. I have a Kobo Forma e-reader. So I know what I'm talking about because I I spent a bunch of money on dedicated e-readers. But something that always annoyed me was even the simplest thing, like I'm reading an article or I'm reading a book and I want to open a link on a web page. Try and do that with the built-in browser on a Kindle or a Kobo. And
yeah, it's awful.
It's awful, right? And so on this thing, it can be a focused experience when I'm just reading a book, and it's super comfortable because it's so light and you can, grab it with one hand and you can keep using it for hours, and it doesn't cause your wrist to, I don't feel any wrist pain when I'm holding the iPad mini. But at the same time, I also have my shortcuts in Safari. I have my shortcuts in the dock, and I have all those little niceties of the iPad OS experience that I set up on my iPad Pro, but they sync over to the iPad mini and I can keep using them.
Yeah, I think too, along the lines of your comments about the touch controls for gaming, is that the keyboard, I think, is a lot more usable in more circumstances on the mini than it is on the iPad Pro, because the iPad Pro, you're not going to be thumb typing in portrait mode, and it's not as easy to type on it even in landscape mode in your lap. It's one of those things where you really feel like you have to fold a folio cover under it and start typing on a table, whereas with the mini, you've got the option of splitting the keyboard or thumb typing with the full keyboard. It's not great with the keyboard in landscape, but I do think for things like messaging your friends or typing out a quick email, it's a lot more doable in more circumstances.
Yeah, I agree.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by MacStadium, leading provider of cloud solutions built on Apple Mac hardware. MacStadium provides cloud solutions built on genuine Apple Mac infrastructure, offering scalable, reliable, and secure private clouds and dedicated servers for workloads that require macOS. MacStadium is trusted by iOS developers, mobile testing teams, and DevOps engineers around the world. Here's the thing. Whether you need a single Mac mini or a fully scalable Mac private cloud, MacStadium can help you move your iOS and Mac app development out from under your desk and into the cloud. And MacStadium's Orca, which stands for Orchestration with Kubernetes for Apple, is the first and only solution for orchestrating macOS in a cloud environment using Kubernetes on Apple hardware. MacStadium has both Intel-based Macs and new M1 Mac minis when you're ready to move to Apple Silicon. If you're building apps for the Apple ecosystem and want to move your iOS and Mac development to the cloud, learn more at macstadium.com/appstories to see how MacStadium can help. Again, that URL is macstadium.com/appstories. Our thanks to MacStadium for their support of the show.
Something that I also want to point out about the iPad mini is I think it makes for an excellent quick note machine. So quick note is the new iPad OS.
Good point.
It's the new iPad OS feature, right? To the point, we were just talking about how it runs iPad OS and you have all these features. Quick Note is incredible on the iPad Pro, okay? So you can press Globe Q in iPad OS 15, and from anywhere you can invoke this system-wide notes window that lets you capture whatever thought you may have or a link that is available as a deep link in Safari or in compatible apps. It's great. But it's also great for different reasons on the iPad mini, where you can invoke Quick Note with a swipe from the bottom right corner of the iPad, comes up instantly, and you can take notes when you're reading. It doesn't, I'm not saying that you can write a blog post or a long review on an iPad mini. You can do it if you want, especially if you pair it with a Bluetooth keyboard and a vertical stand. Maybe you can. I know that Jason Snell has been doing that at 6 Colors, but I feel like this is mostly a tablet, right? This is a touch device. The iPad Pro is the modular computer that supports touch and a bunch of accessories. The iPad mini is more skewed toward the old school way to use a tablet, right? The iPad mini is at its best when you use it in single app mode focused on what you're doing, reading, watching a video, playing a game. But you can do the other things, and one of those things is quick note. So something that I've been doing is when I'm reading a book, I can take a quick note and I can highlight something and I can save it. I mentioned it in my review, Yomu, which is an ebook reader that does something that I wish that Apple did in books, but they didn't, which is Yomu supports quick note deep links for annotations. So when you're reading something in an EPUB and you highlight something, you can save that highlight as a deep link in quick note, which is something that books doesn't support. And this, to me, I think it really encapsulates the iPad mini. It's best experienced as a focused tablet that lets you do one thing at a time really well because it's so comfortable to use. But if you ever need to use the other iPadOS features like split view or slide over or quick note or shortcuts, you can use them, which is not something that you can say about the Kindle or the Kobo or, even on the iPhone, right? You could say, well, just read on the iPhone. If you want to have a big screen that lets you read books and articles in Safari, sure, you could do that, but you wouldn't have quick note, you wouldn't have multitasking, you wouldn't have slide over, you wouldn't have all those things that make an iPad better than an iPhone for reading and taking notes and all those kinds of things that you would do on a device that is optimized for those activities.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too, I think that, for instance, the Kobo has now something called the Ellipsa, which I've tried, and I tried it hoping that it would do those same kind of, I guess, form factor things really well, reading and taking notes, because it has a stylus that you can take notes in books on or separate notes as well. And that's probably, I think it's like $500 with the set that they sell. And that's getting up there into iPad mini territory. And yet it's still very limited in terms of what you can do. It's very hard to get the notes off of the device, and it still has the real janky browser that both Kobo and Kindle seem to have a very similar browser, because e-ink is just not made for, loading large web pages, and it just doesn't look very good for that sort of thing. So, you absolutely can get an awful lot more done with an iPad mini.
Yeah. Something that I want to mention also is the obvious difference between the iPad Pro and the iPad mini, because I feel like this was sort of my takeaway in the review. The kinds of people that are going to, the kinds of people that read MacStories and that are potentially interested in an iPad mini, they are folks who either have an iPad Pro, and the iPad Pro, usually the big one, is their main computer, or they are Mac users who also have an iPhone, and they maybe want to have an iPad in the middle for, chilling at, after dinner, reading something before going to bed, playing the casual video game. And I think in that case, the iPad mini is the ideal non-primary iPad. But if you are in the first category of users, you have an iPad Pro, you have a beautiful M1 iPad Pro with a Liquid Retina XDR display, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to get an iPad mini for doing other iPad things that are uncomfortable to do on the big iPad Pro. You are going to notice the difference between the iPad Pro and the iPad mini right away. Not just because of its size, but because of the display. You're going to notice the lack of promotion. You're going to notice the lack of XDR. And there was a photo in my review that really, I think, sums it up. When you watch a TV show, when you watch a movie, the black levels, the colors, it's an old iPad screen. But that's the trade-off of this device. Do you want to have a extremely portable and lightweight iPad that you can hold with one hand for hours at a time? You gotta, give up on the XDR and promotion dream for now. That's ideally in the future that will happen, right? At some point, maybe in a few years, we'll get an iPad mini that is XDR and promotion enabled. This is not what it is right now. It's a regular display that, if you do a comparison with the iPad Pro, it looks washed out and it's not as bright. And the blacks aren't blacks. They are dark grays, basically. But that's the thing. It's okay for me because I know that I would still prefer to have a small iPad that is so delightful to use and to hold and to use for reading books and articles and playing games and watching videos, I would prefer to have that without promotion and XDR than to force myself to use the big iPad Pro as a giant tablet in bed when I just want to read
Right.
stuff.
Right. I think the photo that you chose, which was a very dark scene from Ted Lasso, was a good one because it really shows that off particularly well. Let me ask you this question to kind of close out our discussion, Federico, which is the iPad mini has gone many years between updates, really since the time that it was introduced. Do you think with this change in design and focus of the iPad mini that we'll see a more accelerated schedule of updates in the future, or whether this is just going to be, another 3 or 4 years before you and I are talking about a new mini again?
That's the thing I don't know. That's the thing. I hope not.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't know the answer myself. I'd like to think that it's going to be more frequent, but it's very hard to know.
Yeah, I'm concerned that if the rumors are true and we're going to get, after 4 years, so in 2022, it'll be 4 years since the last iPad Pro redesign in 2018. And the rumors are saying we're going to get an iPad Pro redesign with a new all-glass structure, glass back that will support wireless charging on the iPad Pro.
Like the phones,
like
right?
the phones. And I'm concerned that that's a sign that new design will be the new default for the iPad Pro that will trickle down to the rest of the line. And if previous Apple is of any indication, so let's say they are releasing the new iPad Pro in 2022, maybe in the spring, could they do an iPad Air redesign in the fall of 2022? That seems early. So I don't want to be too negative about this, but my concern is that we're looking at an iPad mini refresh with a new design in 2024, maybe. Which
I think that is probably a safe bet. I think that's probably the likely thing. I mean, 2023 seems like a stretch. I agree with you there, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. I guess maybe in 2024, you and I will be saying, "Can you believe the mini still looks like a 2018 iPad Pro?"
Yeah. That's my concern is that that's exactly what we're gonna say in a couple of years on this show. That's, man, that 2018 design is starting to feel old, doesn't it? And
so old, and boy, that screen is nothing like the ones today. Yeah, I'm sure we'll be there. All right, Federico. Well, if listeners of this episode want to subscribe to App Stories Plus, you can listen to us talk today all about the aftermath of Federico's 2 big reviews, as well as a little bit more about Apple versus Epic, which I kind of covered because it got lost in the shuffle with all the stuff that happened right after that decision came out. If you want to sign up for that and get the show early and ad-free too, you can go to appstories.plus. I want to thank our 2 sponsors for this episode. That's OneBlocker and Mac Stadium. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. And Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Fetici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees on both. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.